Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is October 21st, 2019, and we are so thrilled to be holding our concluding episode for now with ex-Scientologist and YouTuber and author and blogger Chris Shelton. For those of you who have not been following our latest Mormon Stories podcast episodes, we recently did two lengthy sit-downs with Chris Shelton. The first sit-down did three and a half hours on L. Ron Hubbard and the rise of Scientology, paying explicit attention to the parallels between L. Ron Hubbard's life and Joseph Smith's life and the beginnings of Scientology and the beginnings of Mormonism. My listeners have really enjoyed pondering and thinking about those parallels. They also enjoyed the in-depth coverage that we were willing to give to any topic. Nowadays, oftentimes podcasts are highly produced, super short, and that's a great format. But here on Mormon Stories, our mode is to go long form and to really go in depth. And we appreciate those who support that approach. So that was the first series that we did with Chris Shelton. The second series that we did with Chris Shelton was on David Miscavige and the rise of modern Scientology, and kind of comparing that to the rise of modern Mormonism from Brigham Young until the present. And again, we found lots of cool parallels. This series follows several other interviews that we've done with other cult members or cult, explorations of religions or unhealthy religions, from Tara Westover and her book Educated, to Tova Mirvis and her life as an ex-Orthodox Jew and her book, The Book of Separation, to, what else? Oh, also, of course, Amber Scora as an ex-Jehovah's Witness and her book Leaving the Witness. We have really enjoyed covering other cults or unhealthy religions, and we look forward to doing more of those in the weeks and months ahead. And of course, our interview with Steve Hassan was really important, where we talked about the bite model, the ways that unhealthy organizations and or cults use behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions, thought control and emotions. And if I want to say that more accurately, limits on behavior, limits on information, limits on your thoughts, and emotionally manipulative tactics, either fear or guilt or shame on the one hand, or, huge promises of things like being together forever with your family, joy, flow, choirs, emotion to hook you. Interviewing Stephen Hassan on the bite model was super important. And so that's where we are. And we're going to be interviewing Chris Shelton today to complete this series, talking specifically about his life as a Scientologist. Before we do that, I just want to make a really quick plug. For those of you who don't know, the Open Stories Foundation of Mormon Stories is a proud sponsor of Thrive. Thrive is you can think of it as a general conference for post-Mormons, but basically it's an event that we're holding November 17th in Salt Lake City as a way to promote healing and growth and community for post-Mormons. And so we're bringing Wayne Sermon from Imagine Dragons, I believe, along with his wife Alex, to Salt Lake City. We're bringing Amber Scora, author of Leaving the Witness, to Salt Lake City. And then we're going to have a bunch of phenomenal speakers, including Christian Moore, Natasha Alford Parker, Stephanie Sorensen Larson. The list is super long, but we're going to have just a day celebrating post-Mormonism, focused on positive things, healing and growth. And we're just going to try and get as many post-Mormons together to show that we're out, to show that we're proud, to show that we're healing and growing and moving on, and to make friendships and to build community, and frankly, to help figure out what's next. So the Open Stories Foundation has signed up to be a sponsor of Thrive. Thrive is being run under a for-profit only for the sake of expediency, but just to be really clear, Thrive is not a for-profit event. It is guaranteed to lose money. We price the tickets at $15 a person. Just the venue and the audiovisual and the marketing that we're doing is going to put it at least in the $20,000 range. And there's virtually no way that we're going to get enough people to sign up to pay that off. So it will operate at a loss. We have a few underwriters that are supporting it, but we just want to make sure, even though it's being run under an LLC for the sake of expediency and by the request of the underwriters, it is not a for-profit event. It will lose money, but we're willing to do it, and our underwriters are willing to do it because we care passionately about people leaving Mormonism and helping them find healing and growth. So if you want to support a worthwhile thing, please come to Thrive. You can go to thrivebeyondmormonism.com and you can register there. Please share it with friends and family. We'd love to get a few thousand people there. And right now, registration's around 780, I think. But we'll be thrilled with 780. That's phenomenal. But please join us and please share. thrivebeyondmormonism.com. Please sign up. Please tell your friends, and we'd love to have you. All right. So without any further ado, let's get to the main reason why we're doing this interview. Chris Shelton, we're so thrilled to have you back on Mormon Stories podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. And I think there's been a lot of real fun, positive comments back on this. So it's a good thing we're getting this done.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, have you gotten any specific feedback? And if so, tell us a little bit about what you've heard.
Yeah, no, it's been great. I was sharing the playlist that you put up of our podcasts previously and our live streams, and people were really happy. They were happy you and I had gotten together. They were happy to get a full, one shot. Here's the story of, L. Ron Hubbard. Here's the story of David Miscavige told all in in detail, so that people could kind of see some of the behind the scenes of it and not just the generalized picture of it and stuff. And I've never had a chance to break it all down in this lengthy kind of format before, all in one go. And I think there's been some appreciation of that.
Yeah. Well, I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
Just because I've received the same very positive feedback from so many people already, Chris, about this, what is it, do you think, about seeing another religion, through someone else's eyes that helps you connect to your own experience and see your own experience more clearly? Do you have a theory about that?
It's fascinating because this has been something we've known about for a long time, is that one of the ways that, and I think, if I recall correctly, that it was Steve Hassan who first made the observation that by educating or talking about other destructive cults, one is able to, with defenses down, see parallels, start making connections between that group, which they're not invested in emotionally. So the hackles don't come up, the defenses don't come up. They're going, oh, those crazy Scientologists, right? And, oh, L. Ron Hubbard does this and this and this, and Scientologists believe this and this and this, and they act like this and this and this, and maybe and the person watching goes, now wait a second, that sounds kind of familiar, and they start connecting dots, but they're doing it because it's being presented to them as an education, and it's not being presented to them as your group is, X label that they can't deal with. And so so that way the data kind of goes in and it's more acceptable to receive it that way. And then the dots start connecting. So it's not a guaranteed way of getting across to people, but it is a proven way of doing it. And I think that's something that the watchers of this from both our camps have thought was a positive of this.
Yeah. And I'll be curious to explore this with you later. I've been pretty open and consistent throughout my 14 years career as a podcaster. My goal is actually not to get people to leave Mormonism. And I'll be curious if you end up agreeing with this. I actually see, and this may be bias, this may be ignorance, but I actually see Scientology and Jehovah's Witness sort of as they are in 2019, especially because of the explicit shunning or the designation of people as subversive persons or whatever you guys call it, SPs.
Suppressive, right?
Yeah. That taking, they taking them to a level where it's even way worse than Mormonism. And so even though I talk about cults and we explore cults, I want to make clear that my goal is not to get people out of Mormonism per se. It's just to help people see what they're a part of, see the harm that it's causing, and then help them make more informed decisions about their life. And if that means staying in the church, but just doing so with the full awareness of the harm and the cost and the benefit, that's great. Now, Chris, maybe at the end you can share your motives for what you do. I think we'll get to that as we talk about activism.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, Chris. So let's begin with your story, but I want to start before you. I think I recall you saying that your parents were Scientologists. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So I'm going to go back in your genealogy to the point where no one in your family was a genealogist, was a Scientologist. And I want to see, were they secular or were they religious before they converted to Scientology? And whoever that is, if it's okay, let's start there, or earlier if there's something that's really important for the story.
Yeah, no problem. My parents both grew up in the Midwest. My dad in Kansas, my mom in Illinois. My mom grew up in a deeply Catholic home, big family, I think 9 brothers and sisters, and she was, I believe, the oldest. And my father grew up in a similar large family, I think 7 or 8 brothers and sisters. He kind of grew up on a farm sort of situation, rural Kansas. And he joined, he got out of that life, joined the Navy, got stationed out in Wisconsin or Illinois or something, and ended up meeting my mom. My mom had gone to nursing school, Catholic nursing school, and was just kind of getting out and about and, learning the world and all that. And they met up and hooked up and ended up getting married. And my dad actually was not Catholic, was not very overtly religious. And my mom was, not so super excited about Catholicism anymore, but she'd been raised with it. So that was kind of the worldview. So they had a Catholic wedding. My dad had to go and do some classes and stuff and meet with the Catholic priest and all that. And they did the Catholic wedding. And I think after that, they pretty much dropped it because they never mentioned or said much of anything about Catholicism after that. My dad was in the Navy. They bounced around here and there and other places. Eventually in 1969, my mom got pregnant with me. And
okay, so we were born the same year.
Yeah, I'm 40. Yeah, I'm 49.
Okay, so I'm 50.
Yeah, December I turned 50.
All right.
So yeah, and so December 69 I was born. I was born at a naval hospital in California, Port Hueneme, and at this point my parents were pretty much lapsed. I think I would say, from what I understand, that my mom was a lapsed Catholic at this point. She wasn't practicing or anything, and my dad certainly wasn't. He had started going to college and stuff on the GI Bill, and he was pursuing computer science. And this was, in 1969, 1970, 71, right? So computer science was still big, reel-to-reel magnetic, tape, and there were no floppy drives. There was no internet. There was none of that stuff at this point yet, right? So he was doing programming and systems analyst stuff. Anyway, my folks got divorced when I was 2. They had a contentious, I guess, somewhat rocky relationship, fighting and stuff, and they ended up breaking up and getting officially divorced. And they had joint custody of me. I would go back and forth, and I barely remember. I have just a couple memories from this time period, right? Being 2, 3, 4 years old. When I was 4 years old, my father's brother was living out in Vegas. We were still out in California, and he did a communications class, as I understand it. He did some kind of one of their simple comm course, what they call the comm course, the communications course. And this is a course that teaches how to communicate better, interpersonal relationship sort of thing. Very simple, common sense kind of drills or practical exercises that you do, like practicing looking somebody in the eye for long periods of time, practicing, getting somebody sort of taunting you or teasing you and being able to just kind of sit there and deal with it and not have to react or get violent or weird or whatever in response. That's kind of a skill, being able to deliver a communication, being able to hear somebody, acknowledging, simple stuff. And I stress this because years later, this is how I got into Scientology too, is through this class. So I convinced my dad. He did it and thought it was good stuff. And he wrangled my mom into it. My mom had been having some rough times emotionally, some ups and downs during that time. And he kind of got her into Scientology by convincing her that it was the thing that was going to help her with that. And even though they were still divorced, I guess they were still friendly. And she went in and started doing that. And they eventually got some marriage counseling. So this is another service Scientology offers, is counseling services. And there's a whole array of them, and I won't get into all the details because it would take hours just to explain all that. But the counseling for marriage counseling involves having both people in the room, both partners in the room at the same time, and basically having the counselor ask them back and forth, what have you done to your marital partner and what have you withheld from your marital partner? So it's a way of sort of clearing the air and getting all of the, things you did that you don't want them knowing about stuff, getting all the secrets out, And for some relationships, that's a great way to heal a relationship. It's not, universally workable, but of course, the way Scientology works is it claims that its methods will work on every single person every single time. So they always overpromise and underdeliver, but it's not that their services are completely useless, especially at the lower levels. The communications class and this marriage counseling are good examples of that, where my parents bit. They got something out of it, so much so that they actually decided to get back together and they got remarried.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah,
it's interesting. It's interesting. I don't want to say, maybe I shouldn't say cool. Maybe I should say cool. I don't know, but it's interesting. Can I just tell you a couple things really quick?
Absolutely.
So as I think about Mormonism, number one, Mormonism tends to target, through its missionary efforts, two groups of people. One is super poor people in third world countries, like Latin America, Philippines, Africa, or in the United States, just anyone who's super poor, who needs a leg up, who needs a community, who's trying to advance to a higher station socioeconomically. And that is the vast majority of our missionary efforts. And, a huge percentage, you're either born into Mormonism or you're converted, and you're likely converted as someone in a third country who's super poor, a third world country who's super poor. And then another group that the Mormon missionaries target are just people whose lives are on the down and out, people who are just broken, sad, depressed, feeling a sense of meaninglessness. And that's how these organizations often work. And then the second thing I just noticed is this idea of missionary work through service is so, I don't want to say insidious. It's sneaky, or it's profound, or I guess if you're a sincere believer, it's effective. But when I think of Mormon missionaries, they often go to these countries like Japan or Korea. What do they do to get, or Russia? What do they do to get people in the doors? They offer English lessons, right? So again, they're targeting, people on the lower socioeconomic end of a certain country, and then they offer a service. So in your case, it's mental health services or counseling services. In Mormonism's case, the 19-year-old boys certainly aren't, or 18-year-old boys now, 19-year-old girls certainly aren't going to be offering, marriage counseling to people, but they certainly can offer English lessons because they know English. And again, focusing on the down and out and or offering a service is just such an effective way to end up bringing people into your organization.
For sure. For sure. And one comment I'll make on that, because this is a point where Scientology and Mormonism diverge, actually. So I'm glad you brought this up, is that Scientology is definitely looking for people who are having traumatic episodes or episodes of stress, trauma, loss, looking for some kind of help. But they are not interested in poor down and outers. And Scientology is very specific about this, and it's actually kind of interesting as a difference. Scientology is not in a position to be able to afford to do that. L. Ron Hubbard was clear in Scientology that it is to make the able more able, which is code word for people with money. And because the people who are able are people who are getting along in life, who are self-sufficient, taking care of themselves. So clearly these are people who have income potential. And my father was one of those people. I mean, sure, he had a divorce. There was an emotional component there and a loss. Same with my mom. But my dad was a computer programmer. I mean, he was ex-Navy. He was doing just fine in life, as far as I understand, financially and stuff. And my mom was a nurse. I mean, she was pulling down money. She was a pediatric nurse. So they both were financially, not bad off. And of course, the similarity, the component that is the same between what you described and what I'm talking about, is that you somehow, the cult has to, or the group has to, help the person. Somehow they have to get some assistance rendered to the person so as to convince them that this group is helpful, useful, something they want in their life, and be open to receiving more help from them, which is when the religious stuff comes in with the Mormons, and when the bridge to total freedom comes in Scientology, where we've literally got a bridge to sell you, but it's not a physical bridge. Yeah, I find that interesting.
And then the only other thing I'll mention is, and this is going to come up a lot, I'm guessing, during this session, just the central component of these private, I'll call them ecclesiastical interviews. Mormonism right now is being rocked by Sam Young's efforts to expose how abusive how seemingly innocuous but ultimately abusive these ecclesiastical interviews can be, where a church leader gets you behind closed doors and starts asking you super private and personal questions. You think that it's just them trying to help you, and I'm not going to say that never happens. In fact, I know they're going to be, in our case, Mormon bishops and Mormon leaders that genuinely just want to help and that genuinely are helpful. But there's this idea of gathering information and then somehow it being used or leveraged against you. In Scientology, we know that that's way more intense, and we're going to learn about that with today. But in Mormonism, it's getting you on that treadmill of guilt and shame where you feel awful about yourself, because the church has information that it gleaned from these private interviews that make you feel beholden to the church, or guilty, that make you feel like you need the church to get better. So I'm just calling that out, because as I hear parallels, I'm going to want to make those associations.
Absolutely, of course. And that's a common manifestation with almost all of these groups, is they're looking to solve a problem you have, deal with a stress you have, deal with a trauma you have, and or help you in some other substantial fashion, some substantive fashion that you agree was help. And once you can get that, that's a massive piece of trust that you gain from a person, right? If you help them in some fashion, they will automatically be more friendly, open, and less defensive toward your efforts, even to get money out of you. So that's the component there that works for recruitment. And it worked for my parents, and I was 4 years old at the time. I wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention, but I was happy to, I assume I was happy to have my parents together again. And that's what I remember. And we ended up moving to Pasadena, California, and we got an apartment there. We had not yet purchased a house. My folks had been apartment livers, and I started going to school. And there was kindergarten, and then there was actual grade school in Pasadena. And the Scientology, aspect of my life, so for me, manifested in various expressions of discipline, of a disciplinary nature, or them trying to use Scientology principles on me. And I'll give you a couple examples because they're kind of unique and different from anything in Mormonism or any other groups, really. There's a concept in Scientology of a reactive mind, that your mind is divided in three different parts. There's a somatic mind, reactive mind, and analytical mind. And the reactive mind is the one that gets all the attention. It's maybe comparable to Freud's id, or it's not the same thing. It's its own thing. The reactive mind in Scientology is the part of your mind that stores all the moments of pain and unconsciousness of your life. And unconsciousness could be for a microsecond. It doesn't have to be for a long time. Every time you experience pain, you have a hammer hit your thumb, you have that microsecond of unconsciousness. Now, this is all Hubbard's nonsense. This is not how this stuff really works. But Hubbard says that you hit your hand with a hammer and you have pain and you have unconsciousness. And what that does is it reverses how your mind's working, where you're operating on your analytical mind and your rational mind, your thinking, your aware, your memories, all that. That goes into sort of in operation, and the reactive mind goes into operation. And it starts recording everything that's happening so that in the future, should you run across similar contextual circumstances, and maybe you hear the same things, maybe you smell the same things, maybe there's something about your current environment that's similar to the time you got hurt, it's going to go into activation again to try to prevent you from, hitting your hand with a hammer again, or getting bit by the dog, or getting hit by a car, whatever it was that happened to you. Those moments are called engrams. It's an old medical term for a cellular a memory trace on a cell. And Hubbard avoided structure originally. He said, we don't know how the mind is storing this stuff or where the mind is located. And eventually he said, it's not the brain, it's some energy field around you, which is, which you can't detect, of course, but it's there. And this reactive mind has all this, compounded experience of your life, and later on says that this includes your past lives, because in Scientology you are an immortal spiritual being who has lived forever. And so you've accumulated lots and lots, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of engrams from your past lives, and you're carrying those all around with you also.
And I just have to say, and it sounds like an engram is kind of like a sin, right? It's basically something bad that's associated with you, right?
Yes, but it's not an immoral act. A sin has a moral component to it. An engram is simply an unfortunate accident or incident that happens to you that has pain and unconsciousness.
Okay,
those are
that's
the two
interesting.
Components.
Okay, that makes sense. The other thing is, note that religions like to tell you things about yourself that you don't know, that they don't know, but that they tell you they know because it makes you feel good, and telling you that you existed before you were born, and that they know you existed before you were born, and they may even try and tell you who you were before you were born, fills an existential hole or a question that you would have about yourself. And, it's why people go to mediums. It's like, tell me about, my loved ones died, and how are they? Yeah, your mind would want to pay someone to get that information. And that's why mediums exist. And religions provide that function. In Mormonism, they tell you that you were a spirit that existed in a pre-existence with a loving Heavenly Father, and that you chose the side of Jesus over Satan in the pre-existence. And that gets you excited. And I'm just noting that Scientology has what we call a pre-existence theology as well.
Very much so. Almost all of Scientology is founded on this principle of a thetan, or spiritual entity, right? That is the true you. You are not your body. you are a thetan.
And Mormons, it's a spirit. It's a spirit.
Or a spirit, yeah. Hubbard has used the word spirit or soul because there's a lot of other religious baggage connected with those terms. So I take care to make the same differentiation only because it's not exactly the same thing.
No, I want that. So keep that up.
I want to be clear about that. A thetan has no existence in the physical universe. And this is one of the weird contradictions of Scientology that doesn't really make any logical sense, but you buy into it because it sounds like it makes kind of sense until you think about it too much. But in Scientology, you are an immortal spiritual being called a thetan. It comes from the Greek letter theta. Hubbard just said, okay, thetan, theta, stick an N on it, and we'll call it a thetan. And life force or life energy is, or the component of a thetan that makes it a thetan is theta, and it's this sort of energy, but it's not a physical manifestation. It's not energy like butane lighters, and you see the gas. That's not that kind of energy. It's a higher, non-physical kind of existence. So it's not ectoplasmic. It's not interdimensional. It's not of this universe at all. It's foreign to this universe. It came into this universe 4 quadrillion years ago and manifested a life force that has driven the causative life elements of this universe for 4 quadrillion years. And that sounds like a ridiculously large number, but Hubbard said that the physical universe is much, 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 much older than Earth science has discovered or allows for. And Hubbard loves to contradict science and stuff, and we'll get to more of that, I'm sure, later. But the important part here that I want to get to is that how I was raised with these ideas. Like, this was how the world works. There are thetans. You are a thetan. You are not your little body. You are a spiritual entity. That was one of the first things I remember learning from a Scientology aspect, right? And so the reactive mind is also sometimes referred to as the bank. It's a bank, like a storehouse of pictures of pain and unconsciousness. And so they call it the reactive bank. And it's just another term in Scientology. Well, for children growing up in Scientology, you're not told about the reactive mind, you're told about your bank. And when you're acting up and crying and out of sorts, because you're hungry or tired or whatever's going on, you're told, stop being banky. Because that's supposed to be all the crying and all the other nonsense is a manifestation of your reactive mind, you see. And so you need to stop doing that. You need to stop being banky. This was a phrase I heard all through my childhood. Other people might grow up with, if you want something to cry about, I'll give you something to cry about. My parents were not physically abusive. They didn't do anything like that. They would just talk to me sternly and tell me that I needed to stop being banky. So I grew up with this idea that there was a part of my mind that definitely existed, which held all these, these uncomfortable, harmful parts of my life, and would, sort of use those back on me and make me upset, make me angry, make me, fearful, make me griefy. All of these are what are called minus emotions or misemotions in Scientology. This was also something I learned early on. So there's negative emotions and there's positive emotions. And these are on a scale in Scientology called the emotional tone scale. It's an actual numbered chart where Hubbard charted or plotted emotions and gave them numbers and gave them a rank order and said that, at the top is serenity of beingness and happiness and aesthetics and joy. And as you come down, you go into boredom and antagonism and anger and hate and fear and a tone called covert hostility and grief and apathy. And then at the bottom at 0 is body death. You're dead. And this gradation of emotions has a tremendous impact on Scientologists, especially Scientology kids, because now your emotions have a numerical value connected with them, and there are good emotions and there are bad emotions. And initially, this might sound great as a disciplinary measure to teach your kids to not be misemotional and not cry and have tantrums and be angry. But what this does is it creates a situation where as a child, I was being taught to suppress my natural reactions to things. And I'm not saying that children should be allowed to just run around and be little hellions and temper tantrum, purveyors. But, there's nothing wrong with curbing unsocial behavior or inappropriate behavior in a social setting. But this carries over to when you're by yourself. And I would get angry or get upset, or I'd get, I would experience a loss and I would feel grief. And I would tell myself, stop being banky.
Yeah.
Stop experiencing that. That's not you doing that. This is this is actually right here is the actual damaging part of this. You're not the one who's causing that emotion to occur. Therefore, it's some other external thing called your reactive mind. Therefore, you need to learn to control your emotions by eschewing that and being happy. Let's be happy. Let's, come on, put a smile on your face. Stop, turn that frown upside down. All this kind of stuff taken to an extreme, right? And so right out of the starting gates of my life, I was being taught to suppress my emotions. And I can just tell you that for me and other people I've spoken with at length about this, that kind of behavior is not good for a child and not good for an adult. It leads to bad, going to bad places and doing bad things.
So there's several. Can I just say this is so great? Yeah. There's several connections. First of all, you just triggered one. There's a primary song we sang as kids. If you chance to meet a frown, do not let it stay. Quickly turn it upside down and smile that frown away.
Yeah.
This idea that emotions are bad, but it goes much deeper. Mormons are taught, and Christians are often taught, that there are satanic spirits out there that are trying to influence you and to get you to do bad things. Also, Mormons have a long history of being anti-science and anti-mental health. And what I'm getting at that I think is really insidious and dangerous in the long run is this idea, number one, that these folk weird theories that these religious leaders come up with about how the mind works and how behavior works, that are anti-science, are based on just the weird theories of people who haven't done any studies on human behavior of the mind, teaches you that there are external forces that really don't exist that are influencing you. And they also teach you that you're not necessarily fully in control of what's going on, that instead you're this force being acted upon by these weird external forces that really don't exist. But more importantly, they're just basically training you to understand the world and yourself and your mind and your behavior in ways that have no empirical validity. So it's a way, I don't know, it seems, how can it not be doing a disservice to be teaching people that they have everything, that they don't have everything they need to be well? In other words, what if you taught people that emotions were healthy, that emotions were important, that anger and sadness were just as important as happiness, and more importantly, that if you could base your behavior on valid principles of empirically supported, mental health, then you could find wellness in a viable way versus being hooked into a weird anti-science-based theology and framework that really ends up sort of serving the purposes of the organization, but not necessarily the well-being of the individual adherent. Am I making sense?
No, absolutely. That's exactly, I agree completely. one, all of this is pseudoscientific nonsense. I mean, grading emotions with some arbitrary numbers and putting in a scale of sequence and saying this is the way people act, and every single person goes up and down this scale uniformly. You will always go from boredom to antagonism to anger to grief to, apathy. That's always the sequence. Well, it's not always the sequence, and it's observably not always the sequence, but they've always got some answer as to why what you think you're seeing is what you're not seeing, and so there's all of that, and there is the control aspect of it too. But I really feel that that when you assign your own personal feelings or emotional experience or emotional life to some external force, you remove the causative ability of a person to be the architect of their own experiences.
That's right.
Because
Bingo.
It turns out we do generate our own emotions. Of course we do. It's an interpretation of our experience of going through life. But when you are teaching children that there's some boogeyman in their mind, and that's what's causing them, or demons or spirits or angry spirits or some nonsense, then you're teaching the child that they can't ever truly control their emotional life or experience because there's these monsters around them that somehow they have to telepathically or have conversations in their heads with. And it almost begs the child to become schizophrenic. It's really crazy making. And it's damaging to people psychologically to teach them nonsense like this in their formative years. It has taken me years to overcome this nonsense since coming out of Scientology. I could not experience loss or healthily experience the stages of grief. One, in coming out of the cult, and two, losing somebody that I actually wanted to marry in coming out of the cult. I had both of those things hit me pretty hard, and it took me a long time, longer than it should have, and it's already going to be a bad enough experience. So these formative teachings that the Scientologists or Mormons or anybody is imparting to children, we're only now really, really starting to understand from a scientific end or view why this is damaging to children. But it's been known for a long ass time. Don't beat on your kids. Don't feed them a stable of comforting lies, and don't tell them things that are absolutely true when they're not absolutely true. It's not helpful to the child at all. You are setting them up to fail. And this is, I get on a roll about this because I really hate what some people do to their kids. They set them up for such losses with this nonsense.
Yeah. And and then I think about converting Mormonism, conversion therapy or reparative therapy. That's just one extreme instance of where, the science is pretty clear that you can't voluntarily change your sexual orientation. And yet, when a religion has a motive, which is we can't have gay people, they're going to reject what the scientific evidence shows and then come up with these strange theories about how, borrowing on Freudian sort of concepts, somehow trans or LGBT youth can be converted to, a straight orientation. It just causes mental illness and depression and ultimately suicide. And it's really reckless. I wish, but what it comes down to is the religion needs to be the authority in all things.
Well, exactly.
It can't allow science to be an authority, or else the religion gets undermined. And so it's oil and water from the very beginning.
And the people who are doing that probably believe it because they're raised to believe that it's demons, it's devils, it's the devil in you. Or it's some bad angel, or it's some, some bad thought you had when you were 4 or something, or you looked at porn and how dare you. And I mean, the reasons why these people believe that people are, LGBT or even are having a temper tantrum are ludicrous, but they're all based in these models of reality that have no, as you mentioned, no empirical proof or evidence or there's no evidentiary basis for any of this nonsense. And it's just some idiot's idea of how the world works, and people adopt it as though it's, sacred lore. And they raise their kids with this stuff. And then they wonder why the kids are stressed out all the time and acting out even more as teenagers. And, and there you go. So, okay. So let's see here. Getting back to my story.
So you were talking about how your parents would talk about the bank.
Yeah. So don't be banky.
Don't be
right?
banky.
I had to give you all that exposition so that statement would make sense to you, right? Don't be banky. Don't be misemotional, right? Get your emotions in check, control yourself, this kind of thing. Not an uncommon refrain for parents to their children. I'm not saying that I'm unusual in that regard, but I'm trying to stress this point about the bank because I want people to get that this sets up this idea of how the world is. And I would try to explain this to my friends. And of course they would laugh at me because they had their own indoctrination from their parents about how the world works. There's nobody smarter about how the brain works than a second grader, So, so I started, so I kind of grew up with this. And there were also Scientology procedures that my parents would try to apply with me as a young child. To get over injuries or accidents. There was a thing called an assist. There's lots and lots of different kinds of assists in Scientology, but they're little physical remedies that you do to supposedly resolve accidents so that they don't necessarily go into your reactive mind, or they don't come back and bite you in the butt later on so hard. And this consists of, for example, let's say I fall down and scrape my knee. So there's this thing called a touch assist where you go back through the motions in slow motion. You go back through the motions of the accident and you touch or contact. Sorry, this is a contact assist, not a touch assist. It's contact assist. The actual, let's say it was my elbow, so I can show you here. Let's say I scrape my elbow on the ground. Well, I'm going to go back and I'm going to put myself in the position and I'm going to recontact the exact place on the ground where I hurt myself. And by continuing to do this motion, I am running out the accident. I'm re-experiencing the accident in real time, and that is supposed to remove the harmful elements of it from my reactive mind. This was something I was raised to do, and again, this it took years to undo this stuff, right? So and these little contact assists and touch assists and this assist and that assist, they don't work. They don't do anything. But you can convince yourself that they do. And again, I was 5 years old, 6 years old when I was first learning about this stuff. So the idea of having a critical thinking response to it, or questioning it, or looking at it and going, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's no part of my 6-year-old brain, right? That's not what's happening when I'm 6 or 7 years old. My parents say do this, and this is what I do. And they tell me this is what it's doing, and I believe them. And so this is, these assists were another part of growing up. So was a near hysterical level of looking up words in dictionaries. Now, it definitely helped me to become a more literate person to look up words in dictionaries. But Scientology takes it, of course, to the nth degree. When you look up a word in a dictionary, you don't just find the definition that fits for how you're using it. You have to go through all of them and make up sentences and understand every single definition and the derivation and where the word comes from and all the various uses of it and idioms and synonyms. And it's this big, long affair. And this was drummed into me that this was the only way to learn, because in Scientology, the only thing that keeps you from learning something is if you don't have, is making sure that you understand all the words. And of course, this is not true. This is empirically not true. It's absolutely not true. But this is what I was taught, right? So I was raised with this sort of paranoia about words and how I need to understand them. And this carried on all through my Scientology life. And again, a side effect of it was that I'm a pretty literate person. But I'd prefer to not have to have endured the hours and hours and hours of tears of the frustration of trying to understand things that were way above my head. Because if there's a word in the definition you don't understand, you got to go look that one up in the dictionary and do the whole drill on that word and then go back. And then if there's another one, you got to clear that up. So you could end up spending hours in a dictionary just trying to understand one sentence of a 20-page paper you're trying to read. You know, this would happen to me in high school. And it was just like, you know, it made study torturous. And learning not really a whole lot of fun. And I was somebody who enjoyed learning things because I liked learning new stuff. But the methodology that Scientology makes you go through to learn this stuff and try to be a good Scientologist by using and following Hubbard's advice, it was crazy making, you know. So those were some of the basic principles of Scientology that were given to me as a child to use. Then there was the ethics system. Okay, so let me tell you about this. I'll tell you a story instead of talking in theoreticals here. In I think around fourth grade, we went to a planetarium and got a little lecture from the woman there, really nice lady, about the sun, the moon, and the stars, and you know, and we were shown, you know, graphics and all this stuff, and it was really cool. And we were having a good time. And I was a cut up in school. I was the kid who would never stop talking. And I know that's going to be a shock to everybody who's ever heard me talk. But I was like all the time in school. And so during this talk from this planetarium person, she says, yeah, they used to think that the Earth was the center of the universe, and that the sun went around the earth. And I just couldn't help myself. I think I was, like I said, in fourth grade. And I just blurted out right in front of everybody, well, that was stupid. What a bunch of stupid idiots they were, right? Because, of course, we had just learned that the earth was not the center of the universe, right? And this stopped everything. And she kind of looked at me, and the teacher frowned, and, you know, a couple people tittered, and it was not really that big of a deal, but it was made into a big deal because the teacher reported me to my parents and sent me home with this note about what a bad kid I was for speaking out and being so rude and disrupting the whole presentation. And so this is where I learned about Scientology ethics. And I had to do a series of steps that were called a liability formula. In Scientology, there are what are called conditions of existence, and they have these, you know, at any time you're in this condition, and it's normal, you know, it goes from affluence, normal, emergency, danger, non-existence, liability. And liability is when you have become a bad person and you're now acting against the interests of, you know, whatever group you're involved in, or acting against the interests of yourself. And there are these steps you have to do in order to get back in the good graces of the group that you have now become a liability to. And my mother determined that because I had spoken up and made this embarrassing, you know, gaffe, that I was now a liability to my class and specifically to my teacher. And I needed to make up for this. And the formula for the liability, the steps you have to do, is you have to decide who are your friends. And then you have to deliver an effective blow to the enemies of the group you've been pretending to be part of despite personal danger. And that's a big mouthful. And it was a huge mouthful for me when I was in fourth grade. And I had to spend hours and hours figuring out how I was going to make up the damage to my teacher. I was, you know, like, what was important to me as a fourth grader? My 25-cent allowance every week was really important to me. So I said, well, I could give her my allowance for this week. That'll, you know, I'll try to do something to help her and you know, and somehow suffer through as an atonement or something. Because that's basically what liability is. It's like you're making amends or atoning for your sins. And my mom laughed at me and said that was ridiculous. What was my teacher going to want a quarter with, you know? And I was, you know, just sitting there, and I was supposed to solve it myself. I was supposed to figure this whole thing out. And I don't remember exactly. I think I ended up writing her a big apology. I think I wrote her this big sorry note and told her how sorry I was. And it was just, the whole thing I remember is very grueling and very torturous and very much not something that I understood why I was doing this. You know, like, it's kind of odd that you're made to go through all these steps. And this happens in Scientology all the time. You're made to go through all these steps because somebody else has judged that your behavior is immoral or improper or inappropriate. But if the final lesson of going through all that atonement is not a recognition on your own part that what you did was wrong, and a true reckoning that you should be making amends, you should be doing something, or you should somehow curb that behavior in the future, if that's not the end result of the activity, then it's just a big waste of time. You're just checking boxes and satisfying somebody else's demands of how the world should work. And that was basically the end result of this thing, is I just sort of felt sorry for speaking up, but I never really was sorry. I didn't think what I had done was that bad. And again, it was just hours and hours of getting, lambasted for this. So that was where I first encountered Scientology Ethics.
Let me ask you this.
Would be many encounters with Scientology Ethics.
Yeah, no, that's great.